Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Welcome. American employees of the White House returned to their offices after being evacuated for a brief period of time today after warnings about a mysterious airplane entered a no-fly zone around the White House in Washington. However, most recently, a U.S. security source said that a technical error in the radar system led to the incident, which evacuated White House employees, adding that they will open an investigation into the incident. Meanwhile, 14 Kurdish rebels were killed in clashes with Turkish forces in the province of Bengal, where the majority of Kurds live in eastern Turkey. The clashes came after two explosions targeted the British consul and the British bank HSBC in the city of Istanbul, killing 27 people, including the British consular, and injuring about 450 others. The Palestinian Prime Minister Ahmed Kureya stated that there is no set date for a meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. Kureya repeated his previous statements on the importance of the meeting, but not about what will result from it. He said that it is necessary for this kind of meeting to result in relieving the pressure on the lives of both peoples, so that it can be said that something was achieved. An Egyptian security delegation headed by Colonel Mohsen al-Numani met with the representatives of Palestinian factions in Gaza, including the Democratic and People's Fronts and the Arab and Palestinian Liberation Fronts. The Egyptian delegation presented their position on the ceasefire and invited the groups to participate in a Palestinian dialogue in Cairo next month. The talks were similar to the meetings held with the leaders of Fatah, Hamas, and Islamic Jihad. 26 people were killed in two operations in Istanbul, among whom was the British consular, and more than 450 people were injured. The Turkish Prime Minister, Abdullah Gül, said that his country is being subjected to an organized terrorist campaign. The British Foreign Secretary, Jack Straw, pointed the finger of accusation, saying that the two operations bear the hallmarks of the Al-Qaeda network. The two explosions targeted the British Embassy and a British bank.
After the two suicide attacks, the streets of Istanbul have been transformed into a fierce battlefield. The extent of the destruction from the explosions confirms that a large amount of explosives were used in these two operations. The damage caused by the force of these two blasts led many people to initially believe that 5 explosions had hit Istanbul. The attacks targeted the headquarters of the British HSBC Bank and the British consulate. The British Foreign Secretary accused the Al-Qaeda network.
At this stage, we cannot say we can confirm who is behind these abhorrent attacks of terrorism. I'm afraid to say it has all the hallmarks of international terrorism practiced by Al-Qaeda.
However, the greatest damage has been to the Turkish state, which has witnessed similar attacks in less than 1 week, when 2 Jewish synagogues were hit in Istanbul. The force of these attacks against the Turkish government, which is considered part of the Islamic world, is an embarrassment to the authorities. The British government issued an advisory to its citizens telling them to avoid traveling to Turkey unless absolutely necessary. And the HSBC announced that it will close all of its branches in Turkey. A U.S. source doubted that other suicide operations would take place again in the country. The Turkish authorities will have to react very fast and be on high alert, as it seems that Turkey has become the center of attention to those responsible for these kinds of operations, whose effect will be far more damaging than the obvious monetary and human losses.
As discussions about last Saturday's synagogue bombings were continuing in Istanbul, the 2 bombings that followed this morning proved that everyone has to collaborate to fight against terrorism.
Patlama 8'i yeraltı, 12'si yer üstünde olmak üzere toplam 20 kattan oluşan binada büyük hasar.
The first blast was at the Turkish headquarters of HSBC Bank in Levent, a central neighborhood in Istanbul. The explosion shared off the facade of a 20-floor building. Among those killed at the bank was Kerem Yılmazer, a famous theater actor.
Patlamadan yaklaşık 6 dakika sonra ikinci patlama Beyoğlu'ndaki İngiltere Başkonsolosluğu önünde oldu. Patlama İngiltere'nin İstanbul Başkonsolosluğu.
6 minutes later, a second bomb went off right outside the British consulate in Beyoğlu, another central neighborhood.
Olaydan 2 dakika önce binaya giren Başkonsolos Roger Short hayatını kaybetti. Hüseyin Apaydın ve Salih.
The blast occurred approximately 2 minutes after the British consul, General Roger, walked into the building.
27 kişi hayatını kaybetti. Yaralanan 450 kişiden 340'ı ayakta tedavi görerek taburcu oldu.
The consul general lost his life in the explosion. 2 police officers guarding the consulate were also killed.
Güler ve İstanbul Devlet Güvenlik Mahkemesi Başsavcısıyla diğer yetkililer patlamaların meydana geldiği...
In both explosions, 27 people lost their lives. 450 people were wounded. 110 of the 450 are still in critical condition.
Kamu kurum ve kuruluşlarına ait binalar, konsolosluk ve benzeri yerlerde...
Early investigations around the affected areas where the explosions took place indicated that the attackers might have used trucks for the bombings.
Yapılan açıklamada da yakınlarının sağlık durumları ile ilgili bilgi almak isteyen vatandaşların...
Security has been heightened at various locations in Istanbul, such as consulates, public and government buildings.
07 ve 0212 636 1110 numaralı...
The government has set up hotlines offered to the families of those that are injured. Here are the names of those who lost their lives during today's bombings.
Roger Short, İngiltere Başkonsolosu; Muhittin Şener Yılmazer, Kerem Yılmazer, tiyatro sanatçısı; Hüseyin Apaydın, polis memuru; Salih Çapkın, polis memuru; Adem Sezer, Yonca Bilgin, Ethem Doğan, Sedat Yeşilyurt, Ahmet Baha, Aynur Erkoca, İlbey Erdoğdu, Durmuş Toprak, Candan Toros Anusavan, İsmail Çiftlik, Gülcan Boyun, Liza Havortum, Süleyman Aydoğan, Kiraz Gündüz, Cafer Gündüz, Janet, Nanet Hurma, Nadire Özdemir, Önder Erdoğan, Nadide Demirbozan ve Nazım Harmankaya.
The Turkish police announced that it has identified 2 of the 4 suspected suicide bombers who carried out the explosion of the 2 synagogues in Ankara. Investigations are ongoing, but face difficulties since the tape that recorded the events is unclear. The Turkish Anadolu News Agency said that the bodies of 2 Turkish men have been removed from underneath the rubble. The bodies are believed to be that of Zara Aknasi and Masoud Shabok, who are known for their Islamic jihadi positions. The police are awaiting the DNA results to confirm the identity of the bodies.
The U.S. President George Bush said that terrorists hate free nations and that the United States grieves more than Britain and the world after the abhorrent attacks that targeted British interests in Istanbul. He renewed his country's determination to pursue and crush what he called evil.
Great Britain, America, and other free nations are united today in our grief, and united in our determination to fight and defeat this evil wherever it is found.
The British Prime Minister Tony Blair confirmed that his country's military coalition in the war on Iraq was and still is a noble and necessary mission. In a joint press conference with U.S. President George Bush only hours after the explosions in Istanbul, Blair confirmed that there will be no negotiations with terrorists or a slowing down on the war against terrorism wherever it is found.
Once again,
Once again, we are reminded of the evil these terrorists pose to innocent people everywhere. Once again, we must affirm that in the face of this terrorism, there must be no holding back, no compromise, no hesitation in confronting this menace and attacking it wherever and whenever we can, and in defeating it utterly.
Now to London, where tens of thousands of opponents to the war on Iraq begin a massive protest against the U.S. President's visit and the policy of his ally, Prime Minister Tony Blair. These protests, which have been planned over many weeks, are expected to include more than 100,000 protesters. They occur as the British government has taken unprecedented security measures in the British capital after a report discussed the possibility of a terrorist attack against the president during this visit.
The latest events in the Saudi kingdom have divided the Saudis into two groups. The first group emphasized the need to respond with force against those who carried out the recent attacks in order to eliminate them. The other group tries to separate between those who carry out violent acts and the sympathizers. They believe in dialogue and negotiations as a way to awaken and educate people. The Saudi kingdom announced its willingness to accept the principle of forgiveness, despite the fact that the identities of the actual perpetrators of the latest attacks are still unknown. The calls for using the principle of repentance with groups that believe in violence spread in the Saudi society. However, after the explosions in the residential complex in Riyadh, the principle of forgiveness was completely rejected. Some analysts raise several questions, such as, with whom can one negotiate? Should we negotiate with the 600 arrested individuals? How can one negotiate with prisoners or their supporters? No one knows who the supporters are. Some Saudi writers describe them as ghosts, saying that it is impossible to talk with them. This point of view highlighted the need to ask for some clarification from intellectuals and the religious clergies who advocate dialogue. They indicated that dialogue should only take place with those who have not yet been involved in using violence against the kingdom. The objective is to prevent further bloodshed, thus immediate and calculated measures must be implemented. These measures must include specific guarantees for both parties. The guarantees must address the kingdom's concerns over the increased violence and must provide incentives to convince individuals not to use violence. However, the groups that advocate dialogue tend to ignore the fact that it is impossible for any regime to respond quickly under pressure. It might be true that some of these individuals have not participated in violent acts on the ground, but they encouraged and supported those who did. They share the same ideology of those who killed Arab and Saudi civilians and destroyed property. It seems that the objective of the latest explosion was to undermine Saudi security and the monarchy. This may have compelled a Saudi leader of the Takfir movement to reconsider one of his fundamental religious decrees that calls for the use of violence, permitting people to cover up and not report wanted individuals and authorities. He also reversed another religious decree in which he considered some Saudi writers as infidels.
I could not stop myself from crying. I was very saddened by the death of these people and children. I felt that the ones that carried out the explosions were the victims of extremism. I was wrong.
The Saudi Minister of Interior called on people to acknowledge their mistakes as an initiative to start dialogue.
The door for repentance is open for the perpetrators in these criminal acts. Anyone who surrenders himself or his family to the authorities will have his sentence reduced. The authorities will consider the repentance of those that have not been connected to any of these crimes yet.
Many analysts emphasize the need for the Saudi kingdom to take calculated and thoughtful measures, especially considering the international pressure placed on Saudi Arabia under the pretext of fighting terrorism.
Hezbollah Deputy Secretary General Sheikh Naim Qassem said that Lebanon cannot be a place where chaos mushrooms, according to the Israeli project. Sheikh Qassem said that the threats of Israeli Chief of Staff Moshe Ya'alon to put Lebanon's security at stake aims at raising Israeli morale, which collapsed as a result of the grave failure in halting the Palestinian Intifada.
Lebanon is not an easy game to Israel. Lebanon is not a place where chaos mushrooms, according to the Israeli project. Lebanon was liberated by the resistance, the solidarity of its people, and unity of its army and officials. The resistance will stick to its faith, mission, and convictions. It would cut the Israeli hand the moment it is stretched towards Lebanon. Then the Israeli Chief of Staff and the others would know again that invading Lebanon or staging an aggression against Lebanon is very much costly for Israel, and it could not pass unpunished, no matter how simple or limited it was.
Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon and his Italian counterpart Silvio Berlusconi discussed coordinating measures against so-called terrorism during a meeting in Rome. Sharon urged Italy to exercise its influence to get the European Union to include Hezbollah on its list of so-called terrorist organizations, a measure already taken against the Palestinian Hamas movement. Berlusconi, for his part, obtained explanations on Israel's construction of a separating wall on the West Bank. The EU earlier Tuesday warned Israel to stop and reverse the construction of the wall. Meanwhile, a demonstration was held close by the Prime Minister's office with placards reading "No to the wall" and "Stop the wall."
We are here to show our opposition to the wall that Sharon is trying to build in Palestinian areas. We are here to ask Sharon and the Israeli government to withdraw from Palestinian territory and to show our opposition to the threat that connects Sharon with what is happening in Iraq. It is a threat of war that we wish to break.
Meanwhile, Israel's ambassador to Germany, Shimon Stein, said in a newspaper interview that relations between the European Union and Israel are, quote, not normal. He said if Israel goes along with Europe, we are rewarded. If there are differences of opinion, Israel is threatened with sanctions or something of the kind, according to him. Jordan's King Abdullah II arrived in Moscow for a two-day visit for talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin on ways of reactivating talks between Israel and the Palestinians and the situation in occupied Iraq. Abdullah said he hoped Moscow could help revive the stalled Middle East settlement process. Last month, Russia circulated a new UN draft resolution that would oblige Israel and the Palestinians to fulfill obligations set out in the US-backed so-called roadmap plan, although Washington indicated it did not back the proposed measure. Earlier this month, Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon visited Russia in a failed bid to convince Russia to drop its efforts to turn the roadmap into a binding UN Security Council resolution. Iran's former envoy to Argentina returned home Wednesday after emerging on bail from a lengthy legal ordeal in Britain, sparked by an extradition request from Buenos Aires, where he is accused of involvement in a 1994 bombing of Argentine Jewish Mutual Association, which left 85 people dead and 300 injured. On his return to Tehran in the early hours of the morning, Hadi Sulaimanpour brushed off the case against him as an international conspiracy against the Iranian nation and against high-ranking Iranian officials. He told the state news agency IRNA they tried to taint the Iranian nation with something it had nothing to do with, adding that the Iranian nation is too immaculate to be involved in international terrorism.
و صدور دستور آزادی وی شد.
Differences between the United States and the EU came to the fore over Iran 2 days before the United Nations Nuclear Watchdogs Board is due to debate a report on that country's atomic program. U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell failed to convince the EU to consider Iran in violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. He also had some reservations on the IAEA drafted resolution, saying it might not be strong enough. Meanwhile, Iran warned that any further demands from the IAEA for Iran to halt its nuclear enrichment activities would not be acceptable. U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell failed to persuade his European counterparts to get tough with Iran over its nuclear program, which Iran vigorously insists has nothing to do with nuclear weapons. Foreign ministers from the 25 current and future EU members met Powell in Brussels to discuss whether Iran should be declared in violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, a step that could lead to UN sanctions against Tehran. Powell described the talks about a draft IAEA resolution as a very candid discussion. However, he had some reservations because it stops short of declaring Iran in non-compliance. He said it remained to be seen whether a resolution could be crafted that could be backed by all 35 members of the IAEA board. And he described the EU proposal for Iran as deficient. Diplomats said Powell probably would not win support at Thursday's UN Nuclear Agency board meeting in Vienna to declare Tehran in violation of the treaty. Washington still wants Tehran to be condemned by the IAEA, while U.S. allies in Europe, including most members of the agency, advocate a softer approach. Meanwhile, the Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, Hassan Rouhani, said Iran would refuse any further demands from the IAEA for it to halt its uranium enrichment activities. He asserted that it was under no obligation to concede to demands that go beyond the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty or additional protocol. In recent weeks, Iran engaged in major diplomatic lobbying efforts, with Rouhani sent to Moscow and Brussels and Foreign Minister Kamal Karazi to Beijing and Tokyo. Rouhani said he was confident the U.S. would fail and the Iranian nuclear dossier will not be sent to other international bodies.
Foreign Minister Sylvain Shalom received the Prime Minister of the Czech Republic, Nicholas Zarandas, who is currently visiting the country. In a press conference held in Jerusalem, Shalom expressed hopes that the Czech Republic can convince the European Union to take a more positive position concerning the Israeli and Palestinian conflict. The Prime Minister of the Czech Republic said that his country is trying to improve relations between Israel and the European Union.
I hope that relations will be even better than today they are. From the 1st of May of next year, Slovakia is going to become the member of the European Union, and we want to do our best to help develop these relations between Israel and the European Union.
That I believe we should change this formula that was existed for decades, that Israel can live without Europe and Europe can live without Israel. I think we should work together. Europe can play a key role in the peace process if they will have more balanced approach toward the Israeli-Palestinian, the Israeli-Arab conflict. And I can see that we have a progress in our relations between Israel and Europe.
In an official visit to Washington, the Israeli Defense Minister, Shaul Mufaz, met with U.S. National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice. The day before, he met with U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell and said that in 1 year, Iran will reach the point of no return concerning the development of its nuclear program. The defense minister also said that he hopes that the new Palestinian Prime Minister will be able to control the armed Palestinian factions.
We are committed to President Bush's vision and to the roadmap, and we hope that Abu Ala government will fulfill his commitment to the roadmap and will dismantle the terror infrastructures and allow us to move forward to the table of negotiation.
Prime Minister Ariel Sharon said that the latest criticism coming from Europe against Israel is a new kind of anti-Semitism. Our correspondent Yosef Kabati said that the Prime Minister's statement were made in a meeting with Jewish Canadian activists. He talked about the results of the poll survey that was published by the European Union, indicating that 60% of Europeans view Israel as a threat to national security.
Israel is criticized for exercising its right of self-defense by using excessive force. Those who reject Israel's right to use force to defend itself, like any normal nation, are also those who deny Israel's birthright to exist in an independent, democratic Jewish state in its ancestral homeland. Regrettably, we see this phenomenon among many nations in the world community. And I would say that this is a new form of anti-Semitism. The past 3 years have been particularly challenging for us. We have been fighting war on terrorism launched by the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinians have come to realize that they cannot force us to surrender and make concessions through terror, violence, and incitement. For true peace that will last for generations, and I speak about a genuine, durable, real peace, we are willing to make painful compromises. But I would like to emphasize that there can be no compromise on the safety and security of the citizens of Israel.
Suicide bomber killed at least 4 people and injured 37 others in Iraq's northern city of Kirkuk on Thursday, just hours after 2 more died in a car bombing in western Iraq. Medical sources said a school mistress and 2 pupils were among those confirmed dead after the bomb blew up a pickup truck crammed with explosives at a checkpoint near the offices of the 2 main Kurdish factions in Kirkuk. The Director General of Kirkuk General Hospital said 7 of the injured people were in critical condition. He added that most of them were children, adding a local school with both primary and secondary classes. A police spokesman said the target of the operation was the offices of the 2 main Kurdish factions, the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, the PUK, and the Kurdish Democratic Party, but that pickup was stopped 200 meters away. He noted that an estimated 200 kilograms of explosives were crammed into the vehicle, which was completely destroyed. A local commander said that 5 of the wounded were from the PUK. 1 U.S. soldier was killed and 2 wounded on Thursday when a military convoy was hit by a roadside bomb near the western Iraqi town of Ramadi. A U.S. military spokesman said an improvised explosive device blew up as the convoy passed by east of the town at around 11:30 GMT. The attack was the latest in a rash of attacks to target Ramadi since a local U.S. commander on Tuesday hailed a major improvement in security that might allow a U.S. troop pullback by year-end. A car blast killed 2 Iraqis and wounded 12 outside the home of a leading tribal sheikh in the town late on Wednesday. The U.S. military said it had aborted 4 other attacks during the day, killing 8 assailants, wounding 5 and arresting another.
Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.